One.
All right, good evening. Welcome to Book 2 of Augustine's Confessions. And Book 2 of Augustine's Confessions is where the word confessions starts to mean something, starts to be very apt of a title. Augustine operates in a world now in which he is going to let you know about all of his horrible shames and whatnot, in a way that quite effectively and beautifully takes all the bullets out of the gun if somebody were to criticize him, if somebody were to say, well, I don't think much of that St. Augustine character, I don't think he lived a perfect, blameless life. Yeah, boy, does he ever know that he doesn't. And his desire to not hold anything back in these confessions is pretty key. His desire to not say, well, I guess I lived a pretty good life, I suppose. He doesn't cloak or dissemble what goes on, even at his youth and young age. He's pouring it all out here in Book 2 of Adolescence. It begins by saying, I intend to remind myself of my past foulness and carnal corruptions, not because I love them, but so that I may love you, my God. It is from love of your love that I make the act of recollection. The recalling of my wicked ways is bitter in my memory, but I do it so that you may be sweet to me, a sweetness touched by no deception, a sweetness serene and content. You gathered me together from the state of disintegration in which I had been fruitlessly divided. I turned from unity to you, in you, to be lost in multiplicity. Okay, there's a concept that Martin Luther has as a theologian where he says, sin boldly that the grace of God may be apparent in you. That quote from Martin Luther is like a very bumper sticker kind of thing that shows up on like shirts and bumper stickers and Bible covers and beer steins where it says, sin boldly, and a picture of Martin Luther, ha ha ha. But the point is not that Martin Luther would want you to be bold, like to just sin without caring about it, but rather he would want you to do what Augustine does here, which is to be bold in his recounting of his own sinfulness, to be able to say, yes, I sinned, yes, my sin was grievous and harmful, and if my sin was grievous and harmful, then the Word of God and the person of Jesus Christ are going to be powerful and effective. If I'm going to pretend that I have no sin, I'll be deceiving myself and the truth won't be in me. But if I confess my sins, then the Word of God is going to be effective for what it is. It's not going to be idle and disappointing. At one time in adolescence, I was burning to find satisfaction in hellish pleasures. I ran wild in the shadowy jungle of erotic adventures. My beauty wasted away, and in your sight I became putrid by pleasing myself and being ambitious to win human approval. The single desire that dominated my search for delight was simply to love and to be loved. But no restraint was imposed by the exchange of mind with mind, which marks the brightly lit pathway of friendship. Clouds of muddy carnal concupiscence filled the air. The bubbling impulses of puberty befogged and obscured my heart so that it could not see the difference between love's serenity and lust's darkness. Confusion of the two things boiled within me. It seized hold of my youthful weakness, sweeping me through the precipitous rocks of desire to submerge me in a whirlpool of vice. Your wrath was heavy upon me, and I was unaware of it. I had become deafened by the clanking chain of my mortal condition, the penalty of my pride. I traveled very far from you, and you did not stop me. I was tossed about and spilt, scattered and boiled dry my fornications, and you were silent. How slow I was to find my joy at that time, you said nothing, and I traveled much further away from you into more and more sterile things, productive of unhappiness, proud of my self-pity, incapable of rest in my exhaustion. He mentions the word concupiscence here, and concupiscence is truly, that is the $100 word of the chapter. And concupiscence is the one word there that you might not know what it means. That's okay. I'm going to tell you all about concupiscence, because concupiscence is really what original sin comes right down to. Garth informed me before we started that original sin really does get codified by Augustine in this chapter here, chapter 2, book 2. Concupiscence is what we understand original sin to be. We really do have to qualify and clarify what original sin is, because people believe mistakenly that original sin means that because Adam and Eve ate some fruit, everybody has to die. That's not true. That's not how that works. Because Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, their will became corrupt, and likewise so did ours. What concupiscence means is not only do you have a sinful nature, but your nature is going to want to choose the sinfulness. That's what that means. So when you are presented with an option where sinfulness is on the table, your sinful nature is going to want to choose the sinful option. That's what original sin really is. And that's how busted we are. That's why making appeals to things like human nature to be a good guide for what we should and should not do are broken, because human nature by default is not noble. It doesn't do the right thing and choose the right thing. If it did, you wouldn't have to lock everything you own every time you leave your house. You do that because people will take advantage of you by their nature. That's how that works. They are predatory to one another. They always have been and they always will be. When Augustine describes his own journey of his youth, he talks about it as being concupiscence. Carnal concupiscence, this translation says. I'm sure there are other ones that will be around as well. What is carnal concupiscence? That is to say that you are going to want, that there are temptations of adultery in front of you, and also your concupiscence is going to want to fall into them. That notion that St. Augustine is going to present to you, that says that he wants to fall into his sin, is so thoroughly key to not only his understanding of his own nature, but how to explain human nature for all of us. To say not just is there sinfulness, but sinfulness is a thing that I want to do. My nature wants the sinful part, not the noble part. If you leave somebody in, and I know there's no such thing as like a tabula rasa kind of thing where nobody has any priors and you can just raise somebody from neutral. It doesn't exist. But you have to understand that in every human heart, there will be this desire to do what is not right. There will be this desire to do what is wicked and sinful and evil, which will be part of the way things work. His illustration here is great, by the way, where he says, confusion of those two things boiled within me. It seized hold of my youthful weakness, sweeping me through the precipitous rocks of desire to submerge me in a whirlpool of vice. Your wrath was heavy upon me, and I was unaware of it. I had become deafened by the clanking chain of my mortal condition, the penalty of my pride. I traveled very far from you, and you did not stop me. He talks about wanting restraint on his disorder. He talks about how, in many ways, like the things that are in the Christian doctrine do exist as a way and as a means of restraining humanity, of taking us and stopping us from going too far. These are like when Luther talks about the uses of the law, one of them is a curb to stop you from going further than you should. Then there's a rule, and then there's a guide. But that first use of the law as a curb is what Augustine is talking about that wasn't there, that people aren't imposing restraint. No restraint was imposed by the exchange of mind, which marks the brightly lit pathway of friendship. Sure, why not? I'm going to keep going here. If only someone could have imposed restraint on my disorder, that would have transformed to good purpose the fleeting experiences of beauty in these lowest of things, and fixed limits to indulgence in their charms. Then the stormy waves of my youth would have finally broken on the shores of marriage. Even so, I could not have been wholly content to confine sexual union to acts intended to procreate children as your law prescribes, Lord. For you shaped the propagation of our mortal race, imposing your gentle hand to soften the brambles which were excluded from your paradise. Your omnipotence is never far from us, even when we are far from you. Alternatively, I ought to have paid more vigilant heed to the voice from the clouds. Nevertheless, those who are married shall have trouble in the flesh, and I would spare you. And it is good for a man not to touch a woman, and he who has no wife thinks on the things of God, how he can please God, but he who is joined in marriage thinks on the affairs of the world, how he can please his wife. Had I paid careful attention to these sayings and become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, I would have been happier finding fulfillment in your embraces. Augustine's, in retrospect, he's saying, boy, it would have been better to have exercised restraint. Like that would have been a vastly superior condition. To have looked for and been seeking for restraint. To be saying that God's restraint that he would have put on you is a good thing. And like this is what's hard to get across to like confirmation class students. They never believe you, by the way. They never ever believe you even once. When you tell them that the rules that God has are there for their benefit, like the rules that God has are not like arbitrary random things that are just like esoterically placed on you arbitrarily, but the rules that God has for you are rules that he places on you for a reason. They are there for a reason and for a good reason. They exist to place restraint on you in the same way that, so like, let's say, for example, there was no COVID, and you could go anywhere that you want and do whatever you want, and you could just go and get a tattoo tomorrow. Let's say that I wanted to get a tattoo of the band Fish. You know Fish, the band?
No, Real Big Fish.
Yeah, all right, fine. Let's say I get the tattoo of Real Big Fish just across my back. Now, I can go to any tattoo artist and I can say to them, can you give me a tattoo of Real Big Fish on my back? And they'll say, sure, whatever, just give me the money. But my two children can't, because my two children are under 18 and therefore are deemed to not know enough to make these decisions. Therefore, they have certain restraints placed upon them. They can't do whatever they want. They can't vote, they can't buy alcohol or tobacco, they can't drive cars, they can't get hunting license or like firearm licenses yet, that kind of thing. There are certain restraints that are placed on them because they need them. Because you have to understand, up to a certain point, you can't make these decisions for yourselves. You really can't. And Augustine understands in retrospect, not at the time, but in retrospect, he understands that these restraints were there for his good. They were there for his good and for his benefit. And the fact that he wanted to go around them acted as a detriment not to God, but to himself. Right? That's how that works. It's a much more mature position than our current mature position, which is to say, if God doesn't want me to do something, therefore God is wrong. Whereas Augustine, again, and if we read these books ever, we'd gain a lot from them. But where Augustine says, it's because that I ignored these things, these teachings from God that he would have placed on me, these restraints that would have brought me to a better condition and a better position, because I ignored these, things got worse, not better. That you should have been bringing me towards marriage, and I ignored that, and I continued to satisfy my sexual appetite with whoever and whatever. And he's going to tell you all about that in the next couple of paragraphs. But I in my misery seethed and followed the driving force of my impulses, abandoning you. I exceeded all the bounds set by your law and did not escape your chastisement. Indeed, no mortal can do so. For you were always with me, mercifully punishing me, touching with a bitter taste all my illicit pleasures. Your intention was that I should seek delights unspoilt by disgust, and that in my quest, where I should achieve this, I should discover it to be in nothing except you, Lord, nothing but you. You fashion pain to be a lesson. You strike to heal. You bring death upon us so that we should not die apart from you. Where was I in the 16th year of the age of my flesh? Far away in exile from the pleasure of your house. Sensual folly assumed dominion over me, and I gave myself totally to it in acts followed by shameful humanity, but under your laws illicit. My family did not try to extricate me from my headlong course by means of marriage. The only concern was that I should learn to speak as effectively as possible and carry conviction by my oratory. This idea that God would punish you for your own benefit is, again, I think that's mostly lacking now. Most people expect God to sort of just generally blandly condone everything they do. the notion that God would restrain you and would punish you for your betterment, like for your improvement, is not only theologically sound, but we would understand the soundness of that principle in like everything else. So like if you have a parent and a child, the worst thing you can do for that child is just to give in to their every desire. Like if your child wants to have an ice cream, the worst thing you can do is just to always give them ice cream no matter what. If they want to stay up late and not do their homework and not brush their teeth, the worst thing that you can do is just give in to all of those desires. As a parent, you have to say, no, it's because I love you that I am going to punish you. It's because I love you that I'm going to restrain you from doing whatever you want. And when you overstep those bounds, I will punish you because I have to. Because at this point, you don't know any better. Now, when you're a grown adult, your parents don't step in to punish you, but the state certainly will. You will get punished by your job, by your boss for not showing up at all, or for doing a bad job. You'll get punished by the state for overstepping the bounds of what's legally allowed, that kind of thing. That's how this works. And the reason things work this way is because we need to be restrained and punished if we are going to improve. We understand that we take criminals aside and we rehabilitate them through punishment. That's how that works. Like you take them, you restrain them, you take away their freedom, and then you work on rehabilitating them while their freedom has been removed. This is how this process works. And because this process works this way, we can understand that as working this way with God as well, who will allow you to suffer the penalties for the sins you commit. Why wouldn't he? Why would God not allow those things to happen? Why would he not permit those things to happen? If you are doing your best to steer far, far, far away from what he would have you do, it should come as no surprise that those things come with real, legitimate consequences. And Augustine believes, whether rightly or wrongly, that he has been directly punished by God for what he's done, but not in like vengeance, but to improve the moral, material, and spiritual conditions that Augustine would have otherwise found himself in. These punishments were for Augustine's benefit. Should I skip paragraph 5? Probably. I'm going to skip paragraph 5 here. And go on to paragraph 6. In my 16th year, idleness interposed because of my family's lack of funds. I was on holiday from all schooling and lived with my parents. The thorns of lust rose above my head, and there was no hand to root them out. Indeed, when at the bathhouse my father saw that I was showing signs of virility and the stirrings of adolescence, he was overjoyed to suppose that he would now be having grandchildren, and told my mother so. His delight was that of the intoxication which makes the world oblivious of you, its creator, and to love your creation instead of you. He was drunk with the invisible wine of his perverse will directed downwards to inferior things. But in my mother's heart you had already begun your temple and the beginning of your holy habitation. My father was still a catechumen and had become that only recently, so she shook with a pious trepidation and a holy fear. For although I had not yet become a baptized believer, she feared the twisted paths along which walk those who turn their backs and not their face towards you. This idea of loving the creation and not the creature is hyper evident in the world. Like hyper evident. That people now, by and large, have lost all semblance of love for God and are fixated only on the creation thereof. And that works fine for a while, but then it doesn't. Then all of a sudden things fall apart and don't work out quite so well. The idea that you can find true and lasting joy in anything that is not God doesn't work, because all those things gradually do get taken away a bit at a time. If you're thinking to yourself that you're going to find true and everlasting joy in anything that is the creation of this world, even empires and kingdoms come and go. Families are buried and laid to rest. Whole cities are crumbled into dust eventually. If you're planning on loving the things of this creation, eventually will all let you down. only God does not. All right, paragraph 7 here. Wretch that I am, do I dare to say that you, my God, were silent when in reality I was traveling farther from you? Was it in this sense that you kept silence to me? Then whose words were they but yours, which you were chanting in my ears through my mother, your faithful servant? But nothing that went down into my heart to issue in action. Her concern, and in the secret of my conscience I recall the memory of her admonition delivered with vehement anxiety, was that I should not fall into fornication, that above all I should not commit adultery with somebody else's wife. These warnings seemed to me womanish advice, which I would have blushed to take the least notice of, but they were your warnings, and I did not realize it. I believed you were silent, and it was only she who was speaking when you were speaking to me through her. In her you were scorned by me her son, the son of your handmaid, your servant. But I did not realize this, and went on my way headlong with such blindness that among my peer group I was ashamed not to be equally guilty of shameful behavior when I heard them boasting of their sexual exploits. Their pride was the more aggressive, the more debauched their acts were. They derived pleasure not merely from the lust of the act, but also from the admiration it evoked. What is more worthy of censure than vice? Yet I went deeper into vice to avoid being despised. And when there was no act by admitting to which I could rival my depraved companions, I used to pretend I had done things that I had not done at all, so that my innocence should not lead my companions to scorn my lack of courage, and lest my chastity be taken as a mark of inferiority. Yeah, there you go. That he says, I was ashamed not to be equally guilty of shameful behavior when I heard them boasting of their sexual exploits. Yeah, I mean, Augustine's writing this a long time ago. Like a long time ago. But we get to see how little things have changed. And that your desire is going to be to progress at the same level of debauchery as everybody else, to make stuff up, to say, boy, yeah, I mean, I haven't been debauched enough. How can I appear to be worse than I am? In the eyes of the world, that's the only path forward. And it may seem, as it seemed to Augustine at the time, it may seem that the world that you're living in only operates on debauchery, right? That's how it works, that's how it operates. It's the only measure and metric is debauchery, and that's all. And Augustine certainly prized that and believed that and operated under those rules with his companions. The only way to be better in their eyes is to be worse, to keep up with them in their descent downwards. I mean, misery loves company, as they say, and as things fall apart and people race to the bottom together, they're going to race to the bottom very aggressively and very rapidly indeed. But this isn't news. This is not news at all. This level of behavior is like very, very obvious and very straightforward. And are things that even though Augustine's been warned against by his mother, and as he understands, by God through his mother, he's not going to be working out why this is clearly for his benefit until later. I'll read 8. I'll be quickly. Such were the companions with whom I made my way through the streets of Babylon. With them I rolled in its dung as if rolling in spices and precious ointments. To tie me down the more tenaciously to Babylon's belly, the invisible enemy trampled on me and seduced me because I was in the mood to be seduced. The mother of my flesh already had fled from the center of Babylon, but still lingered in the outskirts of the city. Although she had warned me to guard my virginity, she did not seriously pay heed to what her husband had told her about me, and which she felt to hold danger for the future, for she did not seek to restrain my sexual drive within the limit of the marriage bond, if it should not be cut back to the quick. The reason why she showed no such concern was that she was afraid that the hope she placed in me could be impeded by a wife. This was not the hope which my mother placed in you for the life to come, but the hope which my parents entertained for my career, that I might do well out of the study of literature. Both of them, as I realized, were very ambitious for me. My father, because he hardly gave a thought to you at all, and his ambitions for me were concerned with mere vanities. My mother, because she thought it would do no harm and would be a help to me on the way towards you. If I studied the traditional path of a literary education, that at least is my conjecture as I try to recall the characters of my parents. The reins were relaxed to allow me to amuse myself. There was no strict discipline to keep me in check, which led to an unbridled dissoluteness in many different directions. In all this, there was a thick mist shutting me off from the brightness of your face, my God, and my iniquity, as it were, burst out from my fatness. Folks, right at the beginning of that paragraph, the invisible enemy trampled on me and seduced me because I was in the mood to be seduced. Yeah, folks, right there, that not only forms a core of Augustine's theology right there, but it's going to form a core of Christian theology from that point onwards. The idea that you can be seduced into sin because you want to be. That's part of your sinful nature. That's what that is you want to be seduced into sin, therefore you can be. It's not as though the devil needs to be or has to be very advanced, erudite, crafty, tricky, that kind of thing to seduce you into sin. You're a real big sucker, and you're a real big sucker for the same things over and over and over again. That's how you operate, that's how you work. In knowing that, the devil cannot seduce you into sinning in any way that you don't want to be seduced into. Like the example that I bring up all the time is if you go down to Las Vegas, for example, it's very cheap to go to Las Vegas. Cheap flights, cheap hotels, cheap drinks, cheap food, cheap shows, cheap everything. How do they offer it so cheap? Well, they want you to gamble while you're down there. Now, if you're not the gambling type, you can just go down to Las Vegas, eat the cheap food, drink the cheap drinks, go to the cheap shows, and then leave, and you've ripped them off. But what they're counting on, which is what happens, is that people will be seduced into gambling and will therefore gamble. Now, that doesn't work if you're not actually interested in it. If gambling's not your vice and is not a thing that you have any interest in whatsoever, then it doesn't work. Because you cannot be tempted into gambling if you don't want to gamble already. If you're not interested, then gambling holds about as much appeal to you as like bird watching or unicycle racing or any other like niche interest that you don't have. If somebody were to say to you, hey, let me seduce you into unicycle racing, you'd say, well, no thanks. That's really not my kind of thing. Unless like our viewing audience loves unicycle racing, which this is not going to work. But I'm going to assume that you don't. That sort of thing, again, it works because you wish to be seduced into it. And Augustine is being supremely honest with his breakdown of his life. He's saying these things work because I wanted them to. I wanted to do these things. I wanted this sinfulness. I wanted to get into these kinds of troubles. There was no restraint placed on me, but I'm not going to blame God or anything else. I'm going to blame myself, which is true and good and accurate. That's how that happens. God places certain signposts. God tells you not to do things. But people do them, and in the course of doing them, they end up finding that these are things that they shouldn't have been doing in the first place, obviously. Anyway, theft receives certain punishment by your law, Lord, and the law written in the hearts of men, which not even iniquity itself destroys. For what thief can with equanimity endure being robbed by another thief? He cannot tolerate it even if he is rich and the other is destitute. I wanted to carry out an act of theft and did so, driven by no kind of need other than my inner lack of any sense of or feeling for justice. Wickedness filled me. I stole something which I had in plenty and of much better quality. My desire was to enjoy not what I sought by stealing, but merely the excitement of thieving and the doing of which was wrong. There was a pear tree near our vineyard laden with fruit, though attractive in neither color nor taste. To shake the fruit off the tree and carry off the pears, I and a gang of naughty adolescents set off late at night after, in our usual pestilential way, we had continued our game in the streets. We carried off a huge load of pears, but they were not for our feasts, but merely to throw to the pigs. Even if we ate a few, nevertheless, our pleasure lay in doing what was not allowed. Such was my heart, O God, such was my heart. You had pity on it when it was at the bottom of the abyss. Now let my heart tell you what it was seeking there that I became evil for no reason. I had no motive for my wickedness except wickedness itself. It was foul and I loved it. I love the self-destruction. I love my fall, not the object for which I had fallen, but the fall itself. My depraved soul leaped down from your firmament to ruin. I was seeking not to gain anything by shameful means, but shame for its own sake. Yeah, okay. There's the rubber hitting the road. There's the reality of what we're talking about. There's the reality of Augustine's perspective on things, which is to say, I did these things not even to gain anything from them, but because I wanted to do what was wrong. I already had pears. I didn't need more pears. The pears that I had were better than these, but I stole them because I wanted to steal, because I wanted to take. And then what did I do? I just threw them away. We threw them to the pigs. We didn't want them. This was, and like this here cuts like with honesty, because he's talking about himself. He's not talking about like people in like the abstract. He's talking about himself. And this like cuts through all of the ideas that we have about how people are like generally good and want to do the right thing. And Augustine, who is a saint, by the way, is talking about himself, and he's saying, no, I did this because I wanted to be bad. Like, I didn't want and need the pears. I didn't want and need to do to feed myself. I wasn't starving. I wanted to do the wrong thing because it was the wrong thing to do. The shame itself was the reason for entering into the shame in the first place. This is why anything that's going to appeal to the better nature of human beings on its face is going to fail. Because people don't have a better nature that you can tap into that will reliably work like this. You can't have a system, like you can't have a supermarket that just sells goods on the honor system. You can't do it. It's not going to work. People won't even take what they want even to satisfy their desires. They'll just take whatever because it's not nailed down. There's a bit from The Simpsons, hopefully Chris has seen this episode, where Ned Flanders opens his left-handed store. You saw that one, Chris?
I've definitely seen it.
Yeah. And Nelson and his friends go into the store, and they steal like left-handed pinking shears and like left-handed cake forks and all kinds of left-handed stuff, even though they're all right-handed. And as they're out of the store, they just throw the things away. They're like, I don't even want this stuff. But I steal because I steal. That's what I do. This is what the concupiscence is, by the way. It is not to take a like rational look at the pear tree and say, do I need these pears? Are these pears important for me? Do I need them to satisfy my hunger? Do I need them to feed myself or my family? Like we're crafting all kinds of policy that assumes that people will do this. We're not crafting policy that says people will just take stuff because that's what they do. They destroy, they break, they ruin. That's how this works. That's how it operates. I wish it didn't. I wish we weren't in that universe, but we clearly are. And Augustine will make that very clear to you as well. They shook off the pears, carried a load of them, but they threw them to the pigs. Their pleasure lay specifically in doing what was not allowed. You cannot make the assumption that people can be trusted to do the right thing. You cannot make the assumption that you can trust people to do what is good and virtuous and moral. Hopefully, we've advanced far enough to see that, because again, Augustine wrote this thousands of years, like 1,000 years ago? This is like, he wrote this in 300? Yeah. It's like 1,700 years ago. And we haven't changed. The human condition has not changed since then. That's why, like, people will hack into your system that's why they'll call you with a telemarketing scam out of nowhere that says Revenue Canada is going to arrest you unless you give us an iTunes gift card. Like, it's not even believable. Yeah. But here we are. Why are people doing this? Can't they spend their time doing better things? Sure they can. Are they going to? No. They exist to predate on each other. They are going to do what is wrong. And if you want to test this theory out, you can go, like if you're driving through rural Saskatchewan and you come across like an abandoned farmhouse or whatever, people don't just leave it alone. Like they break into it and just trash the place on principle. Like not because they're going to gain anything from doing it. There's nothing to gain. You don't want anything that's in there. You're not going to like occupy that for yourself. You're just going to break in and spray paint it just because. Just because you can despoil something that was nice. That's it. It goes that deep. And Augustine working that out. Once you've worked that out, a whole bunch of things make more sense than would make sense if you understood the world through the lens of people are inherently good and are trying to do their best. That's not true. No, they're not. And no, they don't. And St. Augustine is like pleading with you over 1700 years, telling you, hey, people don't do this. And living your life assuming that people are on a path to good behavior motivated by some internal sense to do what is right and good is not true. People don't have a reason for doing like wicked evil things that goes any deeper than we want to do it because we want to get away with it, because we want to have fun. That's it. It's pretty shabby. And as he points out as well, that everybody understands that this stuff is wrong when it's done against them. So thieves understand that theft is wrong when they have something stolen from them, even if they have in excess and the other person has nothing. Like everybody knows that theft is wrong, everybody knows that corruption is wrong and murder is wrong and that kind of thing, but they will still practice it when it benefits them or when they can get away with it. All right, moving on, unless there are questions about that part, but that part's very important. There is beauty and lovely in physical objects, as in gold and silver and all other such things. When the body touches such things, much significance attaches to the rapport of the object with the touch. Each of the other senses has its own appropriate mode of response to physical things. Temporal honor and the power of giving orders and in being in command have their own kind of dignity, though this is also the origin of the urge to self-assertion. Yet, in the acquisition of all these sources of social status, one must not depart from you, Lord, nor deviate from your law. The life which we live in this world has its attractiveness because of a certain measure in its beauty and its harmony with these inferior objects that are beautiful. Human friendship is also a nest of love and gentleness because of the unity it brings about between many souls. Yet sin is committed for the sake of all these things and others of this kind when, in consequence of an immoderate urge towards those things which are at the bottom end of the scale of good, we abandon the higher and the supreme goods, that is you, Lord God, and your truth, and your law. These inferior goods have their delights, but not comparable to my God who has made them all. It is in him that the just person takes delight. He is the joy of those who are true of heart. I'm going to continue here. When a crime is under investigation to discover the motive for which it was done, the accusation is not usually believed, except in cases where the appetite to obtain or the fear of losing one of those goods which we have called inferior appears, a plausible possibility. They are beautiful and attractive, even if, in comparison with the higher goods which give true happiness, they are mean and base. A man committed murder. Why? Because he loved another's wife or his property, or he wanted to acquire money to live on by plundering his goods, or he was afraid of losing his own property by the action of his victim, or he had suffered injury and burned with desire for revenge. No one would commit murder without a motive, merely because he took pleasure in killing. Who would believe that? It was said of one brutal and cruel man, Catiline, that he was evil and savage without reason. Yet the preceding passage gave the motive, lest disuse might make his hand or mind slow to react. Why did he wish for that? Why so? His objective was to capture the city by violent crimes, to obtain honors, government, and wealth, to live without fear of the laws and without difficulty of attaining his ambitions because of the poverty of his family estate and his known criminal record. No, not even Catiline himself loved his crimes. Something else motivated him to commit them. Wretch that I was, what did I love in you, my act of theft? That crime which I did at night in the 16th year of my life. There is nothing beautiful about you, my thieving. Indeed, do you exist at all for me to be addressing you? The fruit which we stole was beautiful because it was your creation, most beautiful of all beings, maker of all things, the good God. God, the highest good and my true good. The fruit was beautiful, but was not that which my miserable soul coveted. I had a quantity of better pears, but those I picked solely with the motive of stealing. I threw away what I had picked. My feasting was only on the wickedness which I took pleasure in enjoying. If any of those pears entered my mouth, my criminality was the piquant sauce. And now, Lord my God, I inquire what was the nature of my pleasure in the theft. The act has nothing lovely about it, none of the loveliness found in equity and prudence, or in the human mind, whether in the memory or the senses or in their physical vitality. Nor was it beautiful in the ways the stars are, noble in their courses, or the earth and the sea full of newborn creatures, which, as they are born, take the space of those which die. Not even in the way that specious vices have a flawed reflection of beauty. Yeah, why? Or, I suppose, to answer the C.S. Lewis question, can you be evil for evil's own sake? Can anybody be wicked for wickedness' sake alone? That's a great question. It's a great important moral question because the more media we consume on this type of idea, the more we tend to divide the world into images of heroes and villains, good and bad, right and wrong, Jedi and Sith, that kind of thing. Where you can divide the world neatly into camps of heroes and villains and make that case that way. But then you have to answer the question, why are these villains villainous? Are they villainous for their own sake? Well, if you're writing a pretty pedestrian piece of fiction, then yeah, they can just be bad for bad sake. They can just be evil. That's it. What's their motivation? Well, they're bad guys. That's why they do bad things. But unfortunately, you already know that that's more complicated because you already know that there are things that you do that are bad and wicked and evil, but you would not categorize yourself as a wicked, bad person. You would not view yourself as one of the bad guys of the universe. You'd view yourself as one of the good guys. Okay. So how and why is it that good guys do bad things then? How is it that you would commit wickedness even though you would refer to yourself as being among the good people? Great question. Pride imitates what is lofty, but you alone are God most high above all things. What does ambition seek but honor and glory? Yet you alone are worthy of honor and are glorious for eternity. The cruelty of powerful people aims to arouse fear. Who is to be feared but God alone? What can be seized or stolen from his power? When or where or how or by whom? Soft endearments are intended to arouse love, but there are no caresses tenderer than your charity, and no object of love is more healthy than your truth, beautiful and luminous beyond all things. Curiosity appears to be a zeal for knowledge, yet you supremely know all. Ignorance and stupidity are given the names of simplicity and innocence, but there is no greater simplicity than in you. And what greater innocence than yours, whereas to evil men their own works are damaging? Idleness appears as desire for a quiet life, yet can rest be assured apart from the Lord. Luxury wants to be called abundance and satiety. But you are fullness and the inexhaustible treasure of incorruptible pleasure. Prodigality presents itself under the shadow of generosity, but you are the rich bestower of all good things. Avarice wishes to have large possessions, but you possess everything. Envy contends about excellence, but what is more excellent than you? Anger seeks revenge. Who avenges with greater justice than you? Fear quails before sudden and unexpected events, attacking things which are loved, and takes precautions for their safety. To you is anything unexpected or sudden? Or who can take away from you what you love? There is no reliable security except with you. Regret wastes away for the loss of things which cupidity delighted in. Its wish would be that nothing be taken away, just as nothing can be taken from you. So the soul fornicates, when it is turned away from you and seeks outside you the pure and clear intentions which are not to be found except by returning to you. In their perverted way, all humanity imitates you, yet they put themselves at a distance from you and exalt themselves against you. But even by thus imitating you, they acknowledge that you are the creator of all nature, and so concede that there is no place where one can entirely escape from you. Therefore, in that act of theft, what was the object of my love, and in which way did I viciously and perversely imitate my Lord? Was my pleasure to break your law, but by deceit, since I had not the power to do that by force? Was I acting like a prisoner with restricted liberty who does without punishment what is not permitted, thereby making an assertion of possessing a dim resemblance to omnipotence? Here is a runaway slave fleeing his master and pursuing a shadow. What rottenness! What a monstrous life, and what an abyss of death! Was it possible to take pleasure in what was illicit for no reason other than it was not allowed? What shall I render to the Lord, who recalls these things to my memory? But my soul feels no fear from the recollection. I will love you, Lord, and I will give thanks and confession to your name, because you have forgiven me such great evils and my nefarious deeds. I attribute to your grace and mercy that you have melted away my sins like ice. I also attribute to your grace whatever evil acts I have not done. What could I not have done when I loved gratuitous crime? I confess that everything has been forgiven, both the evil things that I did of my own accord and those which I did not do because of your guidance. No one who considers his frailty would dare to attribute to his own strength his chastity and his innocence, so that he has less cause to love you, as if he had less need of your mercy by which you forgive the sins of those converted to you. If man is called by you, follows your voice, and has avoided doing those acts which I am recalling and avowing in my own life, he should not mock the healing of a sick man by the physician, whose help had kept him from falling sick, or had at least enabled him to be less gravely ill. He should love you no less, indeed even more, for he sees that the one who has delivered me from the great sicknesses of my sins is also he through whom he may see that he himself has not been a victim of the same great sickness. All right. So, we're so close to finishing here. He's talking about, in effect, our sinfulness being a desire to in some way imitate God, but in an imperfect way. To use our skills, talents, abilities, and whatnot for what is wicked and sinful, because we can't do what God can do with his own omnipotence. So what it breaks down as is that we who are human beings in our weakness and frailness are going to pursue ill-gotten things because the grandness eludes us. We exert our will over things that are within our control because of how much is outside of our control, if you see what I mean. So I want you to think about this. I want you to think about this very clearly, because this is an example that I think you can relate to, or I would hope you would be able to relate to. If something bad happens that is outside your control, like you get bad news that hurts you and wounds you and spurns you, if you've lost a lot of money or you've gotten a parking ticket or something like that, if that happens, you will be in a bad mood. Now, you can't change the parking ticket. You can't do anything about that. That just is. But the people that are under your control, you will treat them very shabbily because of that thing that is outside your control. You cannot do what is good and right about redressing that. So what you will do is you will seek to exert your influence on the things that you can change, the things that you can ruin and can despoil. You will act as a tyrant over the things that are within your scope. Now, this is, once again, how you can tell that the scriptures are not mere creations of humans. Because the theological things and stories that are the mere creation of humans, the gods behave like human beings would behave. They're jealous, they're bitter, they're cruel, they're lusty, they're lascivious, they take advantage of people, all kinds of stuff. That's what they do. God doesn't do that in the scriptures. But he does do that in like Greek and Roman mythology or Norse mythology or whatever. That's how they work. They are motivated by their own lusts and desires to be like gods and express themselves thusly. What fruit had I, wretched boy, in these things, which I now blush to recall, above all in that theft which I love nothing but the theft itself? The theft itself was a nothing, and for that reason I was the more miserable. Yet, had I been alone, I would not have done it. I remember my state of mind to be thus at the time. Alone, I would never have done it. Therefore, my love in that act was to be associated with the gang in whose company I did it. Does it follow that I loved something other than the theft? No, nothing else in reality, because association with the gang is also a nothing. What is it in reality? Who can teach me that but he who illuminates my heart and disperses the shadows in it? What else has stirred my mind to ask and discuss and consider this question? If I had liked the pears which I stole and actually desired to enjoy them, I could by myself have committed that wicked act, and it would have been enough to attain the pleasure which I sought. I would not have needed to inflame the itch of my cupidity through the excitement generated by sharing the guilt with others. But my pleasure was not in the pears, it was in the crime itself, done in association with a sinful group. What was my state of mind? It is quite certain that it was utterly shameful and a disgrace to me that I had it. Yet what was it? Who understands his sins? It was all done for a giggle, as if our hearts were tickled to think that we were deceiving those who would not think us capable of such behavior and who would have profoundly disapproved. Why then did I derive pleasure from an act I would not have done on my own? Is it that nobody can easily laugh when alone? Certainly no one readily laughs when alone, yet sometimes laughter overcomes individuals when no one else is present, if their senses or their minds perceive something utterly absurd. But alone I would not have done it, could not conceivably have done it by myself. See before you, my God, the living memory of my soul. Alone I would not have committed that crime in which my pleasure lay not in what I was stealing, but in the act of theft. But had I been alone, it would have given me absolutely no pleasure, nor would I have committed it. Friendship can be a dangerous enemy, a seduction of the mind lying beyond the reach of investigation. Out of a game and a jest came an avid desire to do injury and an appetite to inflict loss on someone else without any motive on my part of personal gain, and no pleasure in settling a score. As soon as the words are spoken, let us go and do it. One is ashamed to not be shameless. Who can untie this extremely twisted and tangled knot? It is a foul affair, and I wish to give no attention to it. I have no desire to contemplate it. My desire is for you, justice and innocence. You are lovely and splendid to honest eyes. The satiety of your love is insatiable. With you is utter peace and a life immune from disturbance. The person who enters into you enters into the joy of the Lord and will never not be afraid. He will find himself in the supreme good where it is supremely good to be. As an adolescent, I went astray from you, my God, far from your unmoved stability. I became to myself a region of destitution. All right, so to conclude this chapter, what you're going to find, Augustine is correct. Human beings are essentially at their core corrupt. They have a corrupt nature. That much is true. That much is evident. That's why you and I can't trust anybody. But when you put a whole bunch of people who have corrupt natures together, the only way to impress each other and to gain status and standing with each other is to engage in corruption. That's how that works. So people, even if they would have been perfectly noble on their own, collectively end up being a disaster and a fraud and whatnot, because they will be seeking to feed into each other's corruption and brokenness. So what that means, finally in a roundabout way, what that means is that the more you are trying to impress human beings instead of impressing God, the more you will do wickedness for its own sake, because that feeds into the corruption of those who are around you. If only poor old St. Augustine could have seen our current world in which your peer group you now carry around with you all the time. All you want now is their approval, which is measurable. You can now measure their approval through thumbs ups and likes and smiles and good jobs on all of your socials. What that means is that ends up being, instead of like worrying about getting a gang of people together all at the same time, you carry that gang around with you constantly. And you know, by the way, what gets you the most upvotes. You're well aware of that. Like, you've seen that happen. You've run that experiment enough. And knowing that carries, you carry that around with you, and that is like your guiding force, that's the approval you seek, that's the approval you crave, for the most part. You're not even getting approval from real human beings. You're getting approval from weird algorithms and whatnot. It's very, very strange. But you are desiring and seeking that corruption, which Augustine found in like a group of like real human beings surrounding him. But now you've just got that all the time. And like the more of that human influence you have on you, the more corrupt things get. The more you do wicked and evil things for the sake of it, because you want the approval of those who are around you. And for the first time in human history, A, that never quits, and B, you can measure it. You don't just have a feeling, now you've got like an actual, like measurable amount. All right, that's what I have for this evening, the end of chapter 2. Remember the pears always, they're extremely important, both for Augustine and for yourselves. All right, thank you for your time. Have a good evening, everybody.